Hi guys, welcome to Junior Golf Guys and our Parent Education video series. My name's Tom and I'm here with Phil for Series 1, Episode 3. And today we're going to be discussing the question, how can I make it fun? How are we doing, Phil?
Very good, buddy. Very good. Yeah, excited to get into this topic, really. I know that it's something that you've done an awful lot of research in, looked into it a lot in your master's sort of research. So it's really cool to be able to pick your brains on this a little bit today and explore some of the things that maybe some of the parents and even coaches sort of haven't looked into with this. And like fun's branded around an awful lot within junior sport and sport within general. But I don't think that many people necessarily understand what actually fun is, because fun's really subjective, right? From one person to another, like different abilities might think that different things are fun, or different age groups might think different things are fun. So it'd be really cool to sort of see your views on it, what your sort of studies sort of suggested, and to explore it a bit deeper, really, for parents to start to understand a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's probably the crux of it there. In terms of if we've got a 6-year-old child in front of us, we've got a 12-year-old child, we might have a 16-year-old child, then we might have a 25-year-old adult. The ideas of fun are going to be very different for those people. And we touched on this in episode 1. And what we talked about was actually fun is fundamentally understanding needs. And what that means is looking at that person in front of us, whoever that might be, fundamentally understanding their needs and then adapting our behavior and creating environments that are appropriate for that. So let's say for the 6-year-old, it might be really fun to hit balls at a clown. For a 15-year-old, that might be less fun. For a 25-year-old, that might not be fun at all, hitting sponge balls at a clown. So that's just a very exaggerated example of it. But as I say, the crux of this is actually fundamentally understanding the needs of the person in front of us and then adapting our behavior towards them. Have you any comments on that, Phil?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so common, isn't it? Like an adult's perception of fun is so different. Like we look at things so through such different lenses to what a kid does. It's not that fun for me to go and hang out at Charlie Chuck's whilst my kid goes and plays on sort of like in the ball pit and everything like that. But it is fun for me to go and watch the football down the pub sort of thing, whereas that bores him stiff. And I think sort of like really understanding, going a little bit deeper into it, and sort of how we can really nurture this, because this is massive in your, like this is the biggest thing why children play any sport, not let alone golf, and do anything, because they they start to enjoy it, they start to have fun at it. So this really understanding what they really need is massive, right? And uh, it's just not like the word fun doesn't explain it, really.
Yeah, no,
Like,
absolutely. And if we just sort of nip over to the next slide now, before we actually have a look at these needs, and specifically there were 3 psychological needs within this theory that we're going to have a look at. What the theory said was, if we actually satisfy 3 basic psychological needs, we are going to increase the intrinsic motivation. So what is intrinsic motivation? Well, intrinsic motivation is when somebody is motivated from the inside. So that might come from a burning passion. It might come from real love. So, you know what, I'm going to go out today, I'm going to play golf because I absolutely love it. Now, on the opposite side of this, we've got extrinsic motivation. This motivation derives from being motivated for something external. So that might be, I'm going to go and play golf today because I want to win the trophy. I'm going to go and play golf because I want to get selected for the junior team. So there's 2 different types of motivation there. And actually, it's important to acknowledge that it's good to have extrinsic motivation. It's good to want to be able to win and motivated towards getting the trophy. But also we need the intrinsic motivation as well. And I really believe that when we're looking at young children, we've got to really try and encourage a greater intrinsic motivation rather than just the extrinsic motivation, because unless we develop that really deep-rooted intrinsic motivation where there's a passion inside, there's fire burning in the belly, unfortunately children potentially aren't going to stay in the game forever, because there's going to be times when potentially they are extrinsically motivated and they want to win the trophies, and they're not going to be able to win the trophies all the time. And unfortunately, if they can't hit that intrinsic motivator of winning the trophies, if they've got very little intrinsic motivation, the chances are they're going to drop out of the game. So if you had a child who just absolutely loved it and didn't win on that particular day, so they didn't quite satisfy the extrinsic motivation, well, that doesn't matter because they're still intrinsically motivated. So I think it's important there to understand we don't want too much weight to be from an extrinsic point of view. We have to try and develop this intrinsic motivation as well. Phil, any comments on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, I think that when I played golf as a kid, like when I'd be putting out on the practice green, it was always to win the British Open, right? I always imagined lifting that trophy above my head and stuff like that. So, you've sort of got that bit of extrinsic in that I want to win that competition. I want to win that trophy at that golf course. But intrinsically, I was practicing, like I was playing golf because I loved it. I wanted to be down there, and that sort of uh, that drove me to want to practice and practice and practice, not just to win a trophy. It was genuinely because I loved that environment that I was in, and creating that environment sort of can come through so many different ways. That can come from sort of like a love of being down the driving range with your mum and dad or your coach, can come from being down sort of like on the golf course because you love to hear the ball hitting the bottom of the cup. It can come from anything, sort of thing. But this intrinsic one, I think we all understand, is that biggest driver that's going to keep that child playing golf for the next 20, 30, 40 years, rather than just knowing that they're going down the driving range and that they've got a chance of winning some sweets off of dad as a result. Like, that's, although that's nice, that's not the real big um driver for that child to want to go down. They should want to go down because they love being there.
Absolutely. And when we delve into this a little bit further, so the theory that this was based on was something called the self-determination theory. And just on this slide now, we're going to have a look at what this theory said. And this theory, the self-determination theory, said that if we can satisfy the three needs of autonomy, competence, and relatedness, we will increase that intrinsic motivation. And that is for someone of any age. So when I looked at this, I thought, all right, okay, so we've got these three needs: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. If we can understand these needs, then we're going to increase that intrinsic motivation. And quite nicely, we managed to fit it into the fun acronym of fundamentally understanding needs. So, what is autonomy, and how can we help satisfy the need for autonomy? Well, I think if we just provide choice, if we can provide choice for someone, they're going to get that feeling of autonomy. Looking at that second one there, so competence. If somebody is successful, if somebody is getting a feeling of success, I think we can satisfy that need of competence. And the last one there, relatedness. What they spoke about here within theory is this relatedness, it derives from conversation. So having conversations with someone, building up a relationship, helps satisfy that need of relatedness. And I think as a coach, it's quite a nice concept to look at here and say, right, okay, how can we encourage children to have choices? How can we encourage them to feel success? How can we encourage them to engage in conversations? And how can we structure our golf sessions around that? But then also for the parent, how can the parent provide a child with choice? How can they provide them with this feeling of competence, and how can they engage in conversation to give them that feeling of relatedness? And I think we've touched on these concepts in the first two episodes, and just looking at that success one. So we did talk previously about when a parent is potentially overcritical, over involved. And I think as a parent, if you do become overcritical, you do become over involved, you're telling the child all the time that they're doing something wrong, that's really not going to satisfy that need of competence. And potentially that's interlinked there with autonomy. If you're potentially adapting a bit of a dictatorship over that child and telling them all the time what they should be doing, we've all heard the term pushy parent. If you become that pushy parent, I don't really think that's satisfying that need of autonomy. Any comments on those, Phil?
Yeah, look, I mean, like, we've sort of spoken about this a bit before, haven't we? And it's very tricky from an adult's perspective because we kind of want the answers to thing right here, right now. But that, like, the studies would sort of suggest that that's not the strongest way for someone to learn. We kind of learn through sort of self-exploration, and it's a much more, it's a much stronger way of learning if I can come up with the answer myself through trial and error rather than just being told straight away. So I always like to think about how children learn how to walk. They sort of see people do it, they see that they like move around a little bit faster than them, and then they have a go at it. And they fall over and they fall over and they fall over. And eventually they stand up and they start to learn how to walk themselves. The parent can't tell them that their foot's got to be here or their arm's got to do this and so on and so forth. So sort of like allowing them to fail, although it feels like a long-winded way of getting to the end result, it's essential, I think, for your child to learn and to get that bit of autonomy and feel that success at the end of it. And I think it's a hard thing for a parent to do, to be able to hold their tongue. And it's a really hard thing for a coach to be able to do, because we know like a lot of the jigsaw pieces that need to go together to create, say, the ultimate goal of being able to hit a beautiful high bomb draw. But we've got to try and ask the right questions from you to come up with these answers to actually create that sort of that that learning that comes from you rather than us just telling you all the time. So I like that sort of being able to sort of ask the right questions, and it makes you think in a different manner, I think, as a parent and as a coach, to allow them to come up with the answer rather than you giving it to them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's sometimes it's a difficult concept, to get around, to get your head around here. It's almost like, well, it sometimes might just feel easier to just give them the answer. But actually, as you've said, if we can help them come up with the answer themselves, that's really going to help the feeling of autonomy. And actually, within that conversation, I like to think that if we can just ask the right questions, the child can come up with the answer themselves. And whilst we're asking questions and building the conversation, we're building that relatedness rather than just do this and do that, where there's very little conversation and actually the child would just be stood there listening. So absolutely, I think it's important to look at these things and actually to just try and step back and just look at it from a different angle and actually really understand that, well, yeah, if we can help that child feel success, well, that's going to feel good. And that was one of the 5 reasons children play sport, wasn't it? And we talked a little bit about friends in episode 1, and that's part of the conversation. That's part of the relationship building. So actually, I think this theory matches up quite well with those 5 reasons that we talked about in episode 1. And as I say, it really is just about looking at that person in front of us and adapting our behaviors towards them. Because actually, I think it's important to say here that when we look at these 3 needs, it might not be a 33% split across all 3 at all ages. There might be a particular time when competence might be really important for a child. So let's just say you have a young child, 6 or 7 years old. We might actually need to concentrate on that need of competence a little bit more. We might need to look at autonomy a little bit more at somebody else's another time in somebody else's journey. So it's not about an equal amount of each, but it's just about actually looking back and saying, well, actually, if we can try and blend these ideas into our approach, then ultimately we're going to increase that intrinsic motivation. If we think about that intrinsic motivation and if we just think about enjoyment, if a child does get that freedom of choice, they can pick the club, they can pick the station. If they do start to feel like they're hitting some nice shots and getting some success, and they feel like they're welcome in that environment, they're fitting in, they're having conversations, I think it's actually quite easy to appreciate that, well, actually, yeah, that sounds like really great fun, that sounds enjoyable, that's a nice environment to be in. And And I think that's really what it's about, fostering behaviors to hit these needs to really drive that intrinsic motivation, Phil.
Yeah, I think that's great, isn't it? In the sort of, I think as adults, we can almost get caught up on needing to complete a task before we can move on. But as you say, sort of like when you might see sort of like a junior golf lesson going on, you'll see kids running around. They'll be talking to their mates. They'll be sort of like succeeding at some things, not succeeding at other things, exploring. Um, they've got lots of choice on what station they're maybe in. And as you say, that is brilliant. That's really fun. But equally, like that adult, if they go to a golf session and they're maybe in a group session, they kind of want to complete something until they move on and have that sort of. They've got a different, as you say, slightly different lenses on for it. So I think it's just important to take into account these things and try and look at it how a child does, and don't feel frightened to muck around with them. Be a big kid yourself, because as we say, sort of like they learn how to walk through copying you. So just play around with them. Like you don't necessarily need to tell them what to do. Just hit in the next bay, like play little games against them, muck around and try and be a big kid, because ultimately you could be their best practice buddy that they ever have in their life. You don't need to be their coach. You can be their practice partner, where they learn off of you and you learn off of them, and sort of like try and go through the journey together and ask the right questions to try and get them to come up with the answers. And that's the hard bit, I think. I ask questions for them to answer it themselves rather than you just giving them the answer.
Yeah, absolutely. And this idea of the self-determination theory, it might be something that a lot of parents have never heard of, and that's fine. But I think it's just hopefully opening up a slightly different viewpoint here. And if we summarize there, what we're looking for is we're looking for parents and coaches to not force something, so give children choices. We're looking for them to not be over critical and actually get that child feeling like they're not successful. And then ultimately at the bottom there, we're looking for them to engage in positive conversation. And if we can encourage choice, we can encourage a feeling of success, and we can encourage positive conversation, I think everything just becomes that little bit more enjoyable. So that's going to finish there today for episode 3. Hope you enjoyed that, and we look forward to chatting to you on episode 4. Thank you.